You are the best behaved Methodist I ever ran into. We haven't even told you that we're starting yet. You're already wrapped. Man. Oh, well, thank you for being here today. I really do appreciate it. While Dane is writing on the board, I just want to offer my personal word of thanks for coming in on possibly the most beautiful day of the year. Really grateful that you've chosen to spend some time with us. Sure. So a couple of administrative notes as we get started. First, before we really jump into things, I want to let you know that we are recording our conversation today for the benefit of people who aren't able to be here. We had some people who really wanted to be part of this conversation, but were out of town today, and so asked if we would record. So, if the microphone gets passed to you, just remember that this is being recorded for posterity. The other thing that I would love for you to know is that we are going to be watching a video today on the screen. And so if you're not someplace where you can watch the screens comfortably without getting your crick in the neck or having to strain or lean around something, you may want to move at some point, now or a little bit later. All right? All right.
Well, I get to say the official welcome. I think we all probably know each other in the room. I'm Dane Walling, your lay leader for this year. Of course, this is our pastor, Pastor Jeremy. We've set this up where I'll do more of the facilitating so we can use our pastor as a resource and can ask questions and have dialogue. We're all one family here at Court Street, but there is a unique feature of our denomination where our pastor is appointed to us each year. So he and his family are with us. And at the same time, some of the questions that we're discussing about our local congregation and denomination are important to us as members, apart from whoever may be our appointed pastor at the time. So we're going to approach the conversation in that kind of way and thinking about what's happening with our denomination, what that might imply for our local congregation. And this opens up some opportunity for each of us to think about our own spiritual kind of journey and outlook as well. So our purpose today is to talk about some of the changes in our denomination that are occurring, that may be occurring. We want to have a chance to learn as much as we can, be as clear as we can about the information that's available. We're going to ask some questions. We're going to hear responses. We're not looking for this to be a debate about, let me pull this up. Is that better? Okay. A debate about scripture or doctrine or to convince each other of something, one way or another. So we want it to be a dialogue. What we want to do over the next, hour and a half is to, of course, we'll get to prayer in a moment. We're going to have you kind of take your sticky note and just in a few moments, think about where you find yourself as you think about these denominational changes. Curious, hopeful, concerned, confused. Maybe you have another word that comes to mind that you want to write on your sticky note. You're welcome to do that. Or you might want to just kind of place yourself up here. One of the things we're going to find is that we're all in some probably different places. And we want to just recognize that and bear that in mind as we speak with each other. We're going to watch a video that's pretty extensive It's going to take about 20 minutes, so for those of you who were at one of the district listening sessions, it's the same video. It introduces a lot of different aspects of these denominational questions or issues. So that will help us understand what kinds of questions are coming up, how our Michigan Conference and the United Methodist Church in general are responding and thinking about those. We'll do our exercise, and then we'll really spend almost the majority of our time on discussion, just asking questions, hearing from each other. Pastor Jeremy will be sharing some of what's happened even since the video has been published, even since the district listening sessions have occurred. There have been some interesting developments that we want to make sure that we share. We mentioned that it was being recorded, so we want to remind you of that. So I think that covers our opening? Okay. So I'll open us with prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we come to you on this glorious Michigan morning, and we seek your guidance, we seek your wisdom for our denomination, for our congregation and community, for each of our own relationships with you. You've given us your Son, you have sacrificed for our sins, and we seek and strive to be your church, to be a bit of your kingdom here on earth. So please, we ask you to give us your grace, to show us your mercy, to let us learn from each other. We say in our Court Street Creed that each of us has a gift. We believe that you and your kingdom need each and every one of those gifts. So let us approach that discussion and these challenges and concerns with your mind and with your heart. We love you with all of our hearts and souls and minds and strengths. We thank you again for this day and for this opportunity to gather in your house. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So, let's kind of see where everyone is at before we turn on the video and get into our discussion. So, with a bit of social distancing, I know we're all wearing our masks. I'll put mine on as we have you come back up front. But just take a few minutes at your leisure. If you're willing, place your sticky note somewhere up here on our ESO board. And you might just choose to put it in one of these areas near one of these words, or you might have a word of your own that you would like to add. And we'll just leave that here as a point of reference. Okay? So please come forward as you're interested.
We really had no idea how that was going to work out, and it was really fascinating to watch. Just looking at the board, I'm encouraged by how many of you are feeling hopeful, and I feel a particular kinship to whoever it was who put their square in the middle. That was it's a very Methodist move right there, actually, and. I appreciate that. I wish I had thought to do that. We've got some curious, we got a whole lot of hopeful, a good amount of concern, a little bit of confused. I'm the one who put myself over in confused, and that's probably because I know a lot about what's going on. And the more you know, the less you're going to feel like you know. If you're hoping that you're going to walk out of here today with like a really clear idea of where we are and what's going to happen in the United Methodist Church, I'm going to invite you gently to let go of that hope and reconfigure your expectations for what we're actually going to be able to do in our time together. There may be questions that we don't have answers to. There are a lot of things that we just can't predict. But really excited to see how many of you are feeling hopeful and hoping that we can address some of the concern that is here today. I will make one more invitation as we jump into the meat of what we're doing. I'm a lifelong United Methodist. Have been a United Methodist since I was born, and even before I was born. I am who I am today because I wanted to serve Jesus through the United Methodist Church. The United Methodist Church shaped my faith, helped me find the love of God and share the love of God. I have been somebody who, for a long time, since I was a child in the church, has loved and had a deep affection for the United Methodist Church. And so it's so strange to me to be in this time where most of the time that I've been in pastoral ministry, the United Methodist Church has been at conflict with itself and has been divided against itself. And one of the hardest things about my years of ministry has been watching people who were once friends, harden to each other and no longer speak to each other, and watching relationships dissolve and watching people draw battle lines and work to hurt each other. All of that is to say, I've been so glad these last few years to be here at Court Street. Court Street is in some ways, in many ways, an exception to what is happening in the United Methodist Church at large right now. These last few years, as we've gone through so many things together, and those of you who live in Flint have been through crisis after crisis after crisis, some of them in the church, some of them outside the church. We have more reasons to be stressed out and to be snapping at each other and losing patience with each other than most people in the United Methodist Church do right now. And yet Court Street for years now has led the way in modeling how we show grace to each other, how we listen to one another, how we make space for each other. And so I'm gonna make just a gentle invitation to you today to keep on doing what you've been doing for years. As we ask our questions, as we have a little bit of conversation, let's continue in that spirit of grace. Let's continue to show each other the grace that we hope to receive from one another and listen to one another as we hope to be listened to. So we are gonna watch a video today that was put together by the Michigan Conference, the Michigan Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church. It's a longish video, and I want to make sure that nobody is confused because it kind of jumps in the middle of the story by what the video is talking about, what it's addressing. And so I'm going to give you just a very brief sort of a synopsis of where we are as a denomination right now and how we got there. And this is like in the teeny tiny nutshell version I'm about to give you. Every 4 years, we have what's called a general conference of the church. The general conference gathers leaders of the church from all around the world, from Africa, from the Philippines, from Europe, from Russia, from the United States, gathers leaders all together in one room. And that is the body that makes the big decisions for the life of the church. That's the body that has the power to change what we call the Book of Discipline, which is our official book of policies and rules and doctrines of the United United Methodist Church. The very first gathering of the United Methodist Church was in 1968, when two denominations, the Methodist Church and the Evangelical United Brethren, merged and formed the United Methodist Church. 4 years after that, at the very first general conference after the formation of the United Methodist Church, language was added to the United Methodist Book of Discipline saying that homosexuality, the practice of homosexuality, was incompatible with Christian teaching. At that time, it didn't seem like a huge thing. It seemed like a sort of reasonable compromise. People who were in the room didn't feel like it was a huge defining moment in the life of the church. That language was added at the end of a long section on human sexuality that said, we believe in civil rights for all people, in human dignity for all people. We're going to do our best to learn from science and from social scientists to learn and grow in our knowledge about human sexuality. And so it didn't feel like, to the people who were in the room that day, it didn't feel like the moment that was going to shape the next 50 years of the life of the United Methodist Church. But that is, in many ways, what ended up happening. For the next 50 years-ish, every 4 years, the United Methodists would get together at their general conference and have increasingly heated and bitter fights and debates about human sexuality. And over the years, language got added to that initial statement about incompatibility. So that there were rules that were added against clergy performing same-sex marriages. There were rules against churches hosting same-sex marriages. There were rules against pastors being in same-sex relationships. All of that language was added over time, and so the Book of Discipline became more and more restrictive, not less, over the course of that 50 years. As many, particularly North American United Methodists, shifted in their views of human sexuality, and as American culture in general became more accepting and more gracious towards the LGBTQ spectrum of people, the conflict became more regional and more intractable to the point where the church said, we've got to stop doing this where we get together every 4 years and beat each other up. Can we find a compromise? Can we find a way to make space for everybody who's in the church? And so in the year 2019, and you'll notice that's not on the every 4-year schedule, there was a special general conference that was called specifically to try to find a compromise that would hold the church together and put an end to all of these battles over human sexuality. The 2019 General Conference did not go as many people had hoped. Rather than reaching a compromise, the people who were in the room that day narrowly voted to make the restrictions even more rigid, and to make the penalties, particularly for clergy, even harsher. It also made it easier to punish people who perform same-sex weddings, that sort of thing. And so at the end of that conference, it became clear that compromise was going to be even harder to find than we had imagined. And what happened after that conference was a group of leaders from across the theological spectrum were called together by one of the African bishops. One of the African bishops called together some of the most significant leaders of some of the more important coalitions and branches of the church, and put them together, basically locked them in a room for 6 months and said, can you come up with something that will be what 2019, the General Conference, was not? And so after months of negotiation, in December of 2019, there was this incredible announcement. At the end of the 2019 General Conference, the feeling was that people who wanted to keep the United Methodist Church's fairly restrictive rules about human sexuality had won. They'd won every vote. They got everything that they wanted. And it was a moment where it felt like those who wanted a more inclusive, LGBTQ inclusive church were probably going to have to consider leaving the denomination. 6 months later, this incredible reversal took place where the people who had been locked in a room together for 6 months announced that they had come up with a new compromise called the Protocol of Grace Through Reconciliation and Separation. I always get those words in the wrong order, but all those words are in there. I just can never remember what order. But there's grace and there's reconciliation and there's separation. Most people call it the Protocol. The Protocol, in broad strokes, was was this. People who wanted a more restrictive view of human sexuality decided that they would be the ones to leave and start a new denomination, a new Methodist denomination. They would, on the way out the door, be given $25 million from the United Methodist Church to start their new denomination. The United Methodist Church would make it easy for them to take their buildings and their assets and even entire annual conferences if annual conferences wanted to go that way. Another part of that compromise was that $39 million were going to be designated for ministries with historically marginalized populations. The people in the room felt like it was important to recognize that the United Methodist Church doesn't just have a conflict over human sexuality. We also have long-standing issues of racism and other forms of oppression. And we wanted to say, even as we're doing this, our eye is also on this other thing. We haven't forgotten about the other issues confronting us as a church. And one other important part of the protocol was an agreement that until it got voted on and approved by the General Conference, bishops would hold in abeyance any charges against clergy for performing same-sex weddings. They would also hold in abeyance any charges against clergy for being in same-sex relationships. The idea was that we would have a sort of a ceasefire that would last until the protocol was adopted. And so that was December of 2019. There was a general conference scheduled for the summer of 2020. It looked like, okay, we're finally going to settle this. There's going to be a split in the church. It's going to be painful, but we're going to bless each other and go our separate ways in the summer of 2020. And then you know what happened next, right? 2020 didn't go the way anybody thought it was going to go. The General Conference was postponed, and then it was postponed again, and then it was postponed again, and it still hasn't happened. Now it's been rescheduled for 2024. We know there's not going to be a General Conference until 2024. When that last postponement was announced, the people who had been waiting for, sort of like this official moment where the church has blessed us and said, okay, go and leave and start a new denomination, they said, we're tired of waiting. We're not going to wait any longer. We're just going to go. We're just going to start a new denomination. And so as of May 1st of this year, we saw the launch of a new Methodist denomination called the Global Methodist Church. And churches now are in the process of leaving the United Methodist Church, and we call that disaffiliating from the United Methodist Church, and reaffiliating some of them, not all, but some of them, with this new denomination, the Global Methodist Church. Now, as you can imagine, there's a lot of questions swirling around in the church about what exactly is happening. If we want to leave, how do we leave? What does this mean for those of us who don't want to leave? And so in an effort to address those questions, the Michigan Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church gathered a bunch of the leaders of the conference together and made a video. It's essentially a 23-minute video with a little bit of how we got here and a whole lot of what's going on and what are the details that congregations need to know. So that was the tiny nutshell set up for the video. Right, there's been a lot happening, so thank you for bearing with me. So what we're going to do now is we're going to watch this 23-minute video, and I encourage you to, as you're watching it, if there's anything that's confusing, make a mental note or an actual note so that you can ask follow-up questions at the end, and settle in, make yourself comfortable, and absorb this information as well as you can. It is a lot, so we will have time for follow-up questions. All right, Ryan at the other end of the church now is going to start our video.
Therefore, in harmony with the agreements in the plan and basis of union, and consistent with the constitutional law in the Book of Discipline, the Board of Bishops of the Evangelical United Brethren Church now hereby declares before the worldwide Christian community and to the entire membership of the Evangelical United Brethren Church that union with the Methodist Church has now been authorized.
On April 23, 1968, the United Methodist Church was created when the Evangelical United Brethren Church and the Methodist Church came together to form the United Methodist Church. In the 50 years since founding that Big Tent denomination, members have engaged in a passionate debate to define church beliefs. In January 2020, the Protocol of Reconciliation and Grace Through Separation was presented to divide the church over what church leaders describe as differences in ministry with the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender LGBTQ+ community. The worldwide members must approve the proposal at General Conference for it to take effect. The 2020 General Conference was postponed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. As we continue to discern the future expressions of Methodism, here are some answers to some of your most common questions.
Will there be a general conference in 2022?
No. The 2020 General Conference has been officially postponed until 2024 due to the COVID-19 pandemic and related travel complications.
What happens if General Conference does not meet in 2022?
That is unclear. The Commission on the General Conference will determine if they can schedule a global meeting or if the church would wait to meet at the start of the next quadrennium in 2024.
When General Conference meets, is a vote on a separation plan likely?
General Conference will likely vote on some form of separation plan. It may include the protocol of reconciliation and grace through separation proposed for General Conference 2020 or similar legislation. A separation plan which emerges from General Conference will hopefully present a process for an acceptable separation into two or more Methodist denominations. A plan will offer guidance for annual conferences, congregations, and clergy to go forward into these new Methodist expressions.
Is there work on a separation plan, regardless of whether there's a general conference?
Yes, there are several efforts to reach an acceptable way forward, forming new denominations even though General Conference will not meet in 2022. To date, no formal proposal.
Regardless of whether there's a general conference?
Yes, there are several efforts to reach an acceptable way forward, forming new denominations even though General Conference will not meet in 2022. To date, no formal proposal.
On a separation plan, regardless of whether there's a general conference?
Yes, there are several efforts to reach an acceptable way forward, forming new denominations even though General Conference will not meet in 2022. To date, no formal proposals or timelines have been established.
What expressions of the Methodist movement are coming into focus?
Currently, there are 3 expressions of Methodism that are taking shape. The United Methodist Church will continue with likely changes, including regional decision-making. The Global Methodist Church, the GMC, is a more traditionalist expression emerging from the Wesleyan Covenant Association. And the Liberation Methodist Connection, LMX, would incorporate congregations seeking a liberation theology and broadly inclusive practice. This expression is not currently planning to form another denomination.
What are the significant differences between the GMC and the United Methodist Church?
The Global Methodist Church has produced materials that indicate the following. They plan to focus on a stricter acceptance of doctrine and traditionalist positions on sexuality, to incorporate more assertive ways of enforcing this doctrine, to reduce the connectional structure of the General Conference, the Annual Conference, and the local church, to eliminate the lifetime appointment of bishops, to hold bishops accountable to its larger global general conference rather than jurisdictional conferences. The GMC also plans to eliminate the category of licensed local pastors and transition local pastors to the category of ordained deacons. The GMC will redefine the category of ordained deacons to include permanent deacons and those seeking elder ordination. The GMC plans to eliminate the trust clause and enforce denominational financial obligations through liens on church property.
What will be the difference between how the United Methodist Church and the GMC hire clergy?
Ordained elders in the United Methodist Church are guaranteed an appointment through the appointment system and itineracy. This means the bishop and a team of experienced clergy serving as district superintendents do their best to match clergy with congregations. By consulting with clergy and congregations and through prayer and conferencing, the appointed cabinet members determine where to deploy clergy. The bishop ultimately affirms those appointments, considering several factors such as the gifts and personal life situation of the clergy person, the needs of the local church, and the needs of the denomination and community. The GMC is not expected to offer a guaranteed appointment. The GMC, as proposed by the Wesleyan Covenant Association, will allow a church council to decide whether to conduct its own search or request candidates from the bishop. The church council will manage the selection process and seek the approval of the bishop, the presiding elder, the congregation's transition team, and the clergy person. It is hard to know exactly how this will work, but it appears to be an attempt to provide further control to the local church without moving to an entire call system.
What are the significant differences between the United Methodist Church and the Liberation Methodist connection?
The LMX is still evolving as a movement, and it is too early to speculate about its structure and polity. As of December 18th, 2021, the leaders of the LMX cast doubt on whether they desired to become a separate denomination. Instead, they desire to influence the continuing United Methodist Church, keeping before it the inclusion of historically marginalized persons.
What will the United Methodist Church likely emphasize going forward after a separation?
As explained in a recent statement by the United Methodist Church Council of Bishops, the United Methodist Church will likely seek to be a broadly inclusive church. Therefore, it will be much more open to ministry with and to LGBTQ+ persons. There will be a space for diverse and perhaps even contradictory convictions as the church seeks to understand and live out Christ's call more fully. The United Methodist Church will need to streamline and prioritize its general church structure and missional programs. The key themes are available on umc.org.
Will the GMC come into existence before a general conference?
The Global Methodist Church launched May 1st, 2022.
If our congregation wants to leave the denomination, are there advantages to waiting for General Conference to meet?
Yes, congregations are discouraged from taking votes on what are now only speculative possibilities. A separation plan voted on at General Conference will likely present more favorable financial terms for a congregation wanting to join another Methodist expression. It is in the congregation's best interest to wait and see what is decided. This is especially true as it relates to unfunded pension liabilities. That said, there may be new pathways for separation identified in the coming months. It is in a congregation's best interest to see what may develop and not rush towards separation.
What thoughts has Bishop Bard offered on how the Michigan Conference will operate post-separation?
Moving into the future, I expect the United Methodist Church to be committed to spaciousness. It is my intent to lead the Michigan Conference to be a spacious conference. Spaciousness will allow for freedom of thought and conscience in keeping with the Wesleyan idea that though we may not think alike, we may love alike. A spacious conference will have room for forms of ministry appropriate to varying contexts. This freedom will exist for those who consider themselves liberal and those who consider themselves conservative. My prayers are for a grace-filled separation, giving congregations and clergy ample time to make decisions about their future. In the meantime, I will do my best to facilitate appointment making to minimize disruption for congregations and clergy. There are provisions in the Book of Discipline to appoint clergy of other denominations to serve United Methodist congregations. Other disciplinary provisions allow for United Methodist clergy to serve non-United Methodist churches. In this challenging time, I will be kind, caring, and creative as we move into a new future.
Our congregation wants to stay with the United Methodist Church. Does this mean we agree to have an LGBTQ plus clergy and perform same-gender weddings?
Under the vision cast by Bishop Bard and the current Council of Bishops, no congregation will be required to receive an LGBTQ plus clergy. Just as they do now, the bishop and appointive cabinet will consult with churches and do their best to match clergy with congregations. No clergy or congregation will be required to perform same-gender wedding services. Whether to perform weddings will remain in clergy discretion.
Now the General Conference will not meet in 2022, what should a congregation do if they desire to leave the United Methodist Church over the LGBTQ plus stance?
Be certain you and your congregation fully understand the long-term legal and financial consequences of leaving the denomination. Bishop Bard has followed the disaffiliation process passed at the 2019 General Conference and implemented by the Michigan Conference Board of Trustees. Materials for this disaffiliation process are on our conference website. According to the United Methodist Book of Discipline, a congregation will need to have a vote at a duly called church conference. A 2/3 vote of the congregation will be required. This vote will need to have a moral grounding based on an objection to the current or future stance of the United Methodist Church toward LGBTQ persons. The district superintendent will be the point person for starting and achieving this disaffiliation process. The Conference Board of Trustees will complete the process and prepare all formal documents. To disaffiliate, the congregation will have several financial obligations, including all unpaid ministry shares for the 12 months immediately before the withdrawal date, plus 1 year's ministry shares, and to represent the congregation's property values an additional 2 times the current annual ministry shares, plus the congregation's share of the Michigan Conference's unfunded pension liability, all unpaid pension and health insurance balances from prior years, and any outstanding loans. Please contact the conference treasurer and your district superintendent to provide more detailed and specific information. It is important to note that all disaffiliations must be approved by a vote of the annual conference session. In return for payment of all funds due and the formal conference vote, the United Methodist Trust Clause will be released with a quitclaim deed releasing all restrictions imposed by the United Methodist Book of Discipline. The congregation will also then retain all of its personal property, including fund balances. As you can see, there are significant financial and procedural obligations that must be met to disaffiliate. It is critically important to be in communications with your district superintendent and that your church leadership is fully informed of these obligations before any decision is made.
What if a congregation desires to leave the denomination, but does not have a moral objection to the LGBTQ plus stance of the United Methodist Church or the Michigan Conference?
the congregation will need to close and go through the process for closure for congregations provided in the United Methodist Church Book of Discipline. Financial terms are negotiable in return for release of the trust clause. However, all unfunded pension liabilities are required to be paid as part of the settlement. Suppose the congregation desires to purchase its property. In that case, the congregation may do so after negotiation of all terms with the Michigan Conference Board of Trustees. The Board of Trustees will deed the property to the purchasing congregation for the negotiated purchase price.
When do we have to vote?
It is important to note that no vote is required or planned at this time. Any separation agreement is unlikely to require every congregation to vote. By default, congregations not voting will remain in the Michigan Conference of the United Methodist Church. Those desiring to leave through a plan of separation will vote according to the terms of that plan as determined by General Conference, but not before. Those desiring to leave before General Conference through disaffiliation will vote in a duly called church conference as determined with the district superintendent. Those desiring to leave through closure will vote in a duly called church conference as determined with the district superintendent.
What happens to me if my church votes to leave or stay and I disagree with that decision?
Members who disagree with the decision of their congregation may decide to stay or to transfer their membership to another congregation. District offices may help facilitate such transfers of membership. It is also conceivable that if a significant number of individuals of a departing congregation desire to stay with the United Methodist Church, they could pursue a new church start.
How will our ministry shares be affected if we remain in the United Methodist Church? With churches leaving, will our ministry shares increase?
Congregations that leave the United Methodist Church will no longer pay ministry shares to the Michigan Conference. The result will be less revenue for the general church and the annual conference. In theory, the percentage share assessed to each remaining congregation may change. However, the Conference Council on Finance and Administration and Michigan Conference staff are making great efforts now to reduce the conference budget in anticipation of a decline in revenue.
What happens to our clergy if we leave through disaffiliation?
A clergy person may choose to go with the departing congregation or stay with the United Methodist Church. If a disaffiliating congregation joins the GMC or the LMX, then the clergy's salary and benefits, appointment and tenure will be determined by those new denominations. If the disaffiliating congregation becomes independent, then the clergy's salary and benefits and tenure will be determined by that congregation. The clergy who remain in the United Methodist Church and do not move to a new denomination will continue to be reappointed to a United Methodist Church by the bishop. In all cases, congregations thinking of leaving the United Methodist Church should research the many impacts of that decision on their clergy leader.
If clergy choose to leave the United Methodist Church, what will happen to their Westpath retirement benefits?
In all cases of clergy leaving the denomination, their Westpath accrued retirement benefits will be fully vested. However, a clergy cannot be a participant in the Comprehensive Protection Plan. If a congregation leaves through a General Conference approved protocol or plan of separation, the new denomination will likely participate in Westpath. The clergy will continue to receive contributions to their retirement plans according to the new plan adopted by the new denomination and Westpath. If a congregation leaves through disaffiliation to become independent or through closure, the new congregation will not participate in Westpath.
If our clergy decides to leave the United Methodist Church, will they remain in the Michigan Conference healthcare plan and eventually receive supplemental healthcare coverage in their retirement?
No, once clergy leave membership in the United Methodist Church and the Michigan Conference for any reason, their conference health care plan ends. They cannot participate as an active clergy person or in retirement.
Can clergy decide to leave the denomination and join another, even if their congregation does not?
Yes. Even if a congregation does not desire to leave the United Methodist Church, clergy can choose to join, assuming that the clergy is acceptable by the GMC or LMX. The clergy's Westpath retirement benefits will be vested. However, their Michigan Conference health care plan will end as soon as they leave.
Can retired clergy join the GMC and/or LMX?
Clergy who are already retired in the United Methodist Church can become retired clergy in the GMC or LMX if they are acceptable to the new denomination. In such a case, they will retain all retirement benefits through Westpath. Retired clergy who join the GMC or LMX will not remain in the Michigan Conference healthcare plan or receive supplemental coverage.
Can retired clergy join the GMC and/or LMX and remain a member of the Michigan Conference?
No, you cannot be a member of both denominations.
What questions should we be asking as a congregation before we vote?
First, make sure you have all the best information. Disaffiliation is an emotionally charged conversation, and there is a lot of speculation and inaccurate information. After you have the facts, discern why you might consider leaving the denomination. These are some helpful spiritual questions. What is the primary focus of your life as a Christian? How do you define a disciple of Jesus Christ? What are your primary values as a congregation? How open are you to being a part of a denomination that is spacious and open to many ideas? Can you participate in a congregation with whom you disagree? Do you fully understand the impact on property ownership, clergy pensions, and health care if your church leaves? What is the source of your information? Does it offer different perspectives so you can make a fully informed decision? How can we continue to bless one another, even in disagreement?
Where can I learn more and stay up to date?
If you have specific questions regarding the future of the church, please reach out to the Michigan Conference staff at contact@michiganumc.org or your local district office. You can also learn more on the conference website, michiganumc.org.
Let's take a moment to appreciate Ryan Pratt for being so calm and thinking on his toes. It is not easy to be the tech person when the equipment malfunctions, and I so appreciate his level-headedness and ability to problem solve on the fly. So Ryan, thank you. Appreciate you being here to help us with the tech today. So that's a lot of information, right? I mean, that is a huge amount of information. I've watched this video I don't know how many times at this point, you know, I wanted you to see it in part because it does contain good information. It gives me a sense of confidence that our Michigan area conference leaders are on top of things and helping congregations have the information they need. And also, even if some of that information just kind of made you shrug and go, I don't know why I needed to know that, I hope that it gave you a sense of just how hard breaking up can be. This is a complicated process. I hope there maybe was a moment when you went, oh, I didn't even consider that was something churches would have to be asking themselves right now, right? So just a quick follow-up before we jump into questions and answers about what has happened since that video was produced, and really what has happened even in just the last couple of weeks. So right now, there's a real question mark around the protocol, which for a couple years looked like it was going to be the thing that helped us chart the future of the United Methodist Church. Because the Global Methodist Church has already started before the protocol was passed, and churches are already leaving, there's real questions as to whether or not the protocol or something like it will be passed when the next General Conference happens. Negotiations are happening right now. A lot of the people who helped to negotiate the protocol and endorsed it have withdrawn their endorsements in the last few weeks, but it still is legislation that's in front of the General Conference when they get together, so it still could be approved. We're in a time that is in some ways more uncertain than we were 2 months ago or a year ago, because we thought we had a pretty clear picture of what was going to happen, and now it's not clear that we do. So I can't make firm predictions about what's going to happen at the next General Conference. I can tell you what we see happening in the church right now, which is because General Conference has been postponed over and over again, we're starting to see not only the Global Methodist Church, but also people who are staying within the United Methodist Church beginning to chart their own path. We're seeing a sort of de facto regionalization in approaches to moving forward, even though the Book of Discipline hasn't changed. So, for example, here at this last Michigan Annual Conference just a couple weeks ago, we ordained 17 clergy, which is phenomenal. That is a lot of clergy for us to be ordaining. They're great young leaders in the church. Of note is that 2 of the clergy who were ordained at this last annual conference are openly LGBTQ. One of them is in a same-sex marriage, and we voted to approve them and ordain them anyhow. And it turns out there's not really anything anybody can do about that. If we want to do it, we can do it. Even though it's against the rules, there's no mechanism for punishing the Michigan Annual Conference for doing that. On the other hand, in Florida, just about a week ago, they had a similar situation where they had a class of, I think it was 16 candidates who were coming forward to be commissioned as clergy, and because 2 of them were openly LGBTQ, the Florida Conference voted not to commission the entirety of the class of candidates, rather than accept 2 openly LGBTQ clergy people. So you can see that Florida and Michigan are going in very, very different directions. And that's what we see happening all around us in the church right now. Because General Conference hasn't met, annual conferences, and to a certain extent congregations are making their own decisions about what do we do? What do we do with the situation we have? How are we in ministry until the next General Conference happens? And as the video said, what do we believe it means to be a disciple of Jesus? What are our values? How are we going to live those out? So that's a little bit of what we're going to be working on today and in months to come at Court Street. And I've monologued enough. Let's jump into any questions that you might have. Particularly if there's any follow-up questions. There was a lot of United Methodist jargon in the video. If there were terms that you didn't understand or things that just kind of confused you, I would love to help to clarify those. And also, we're happy to have any bigger questions about what is happening in the church and what its implications are for us and for other parts of the United Methodist Church. So is there anybody who wants to, and Dane's going to come around with a microphone because we are recording this, so we do want to make sure we get your voices on the recording as well. Anybody who came with a question or had one that came up as you were watching the video today? Yep.
Hello, everyone. My name is Neil Sieward. I have been married for 49 years, and even though I feel my marriage has been successful, my affiliation with churches has not been. I have been in those 49 years to so many churches. Because of my job and career, I dealt with conflict on a daily basis. I do not like conflict when I come to church. This is the place where I want to be centered, and fortunately, Pastor Jeremy, Dane Walling, and you people in the pews have kept me centered more at this church than any other church I've ever attended. My question is, I feel restless right now because of this conflict. I feel myself once again leaning to the door and wanting to leave. My concern is Court Street, caring, loving, accepting all people, even me. Is there any changes on the horizon? Or are we going to stay the loving, accepting all church that we are presently?
Wow, thank you, Neil. Not only for the question, but for sharing your heart. Really appreciate your willingness to be truthful and vulnerable like that in this space. One of the things that we're going to do before we end our time today is talk about what is the process that Court Street's going to go through. What steps will we have from here? How is the conversation going to happen at Court Street? Today is just an informational session. This is not the end of the conversation we're going to have or the decision-making process at Court Street. And so, I can answer that question. I'm going to answer on your behalf, if that's okay. It's strange because this is the question that you've asked. The answer to that question is going to have to be owned by Court Street United Methodist Church. This is a moment in which the congregation will need to make decisions that you're going to own and claim and are going to guide your ministry for decades to come, long after the bishop has appointed 6 other clergy people to be here at Court Street United Methodist Church. And so, to a certain extent, like what I think or what I feel is irrelevant. But I can say this, having been here for 7 years, my concern is not that Court Street's going to stop being Court Street. I think, I don't have any worries about that. I think the love that is in this place, the spirit that we have encountered and that has knit us together in this place will continue to be here. The questions that we're wrestling with is not so much who are we. The question that we're going to wrestle with for the next few months is how do we live out that sense we already have of who we are? How are we in ministry in light of our core values, in light of our Court Street creed, in light of our long history and heritage, in light of the things that God has done among us here? How are we in ministry with LGBTQ people and with other historically marginalized communities? That's the conversation we're going to be having. I think I don't have any worries that we're going to see any dramatic changes to who Court Street is. I think you're going to keep on being who you have been. It's just a question of how do we live that out. Does that kind of speak to what you were asking? Okay, good. Well, thanks.
Yeah, and I think even listening to the video, you can imagine maybe other Methodist churches or people, looking at this from different perspectives. But I can tell you from my time serving on trustees and chair of trustees and on church council, there haven't been significant interests or discussions about many of the things that were mentioned in the video about disaffiliation or those sorts of things. But we wanted to have this town hall, I think, in the same spirit that the district superintendent did. So for those who want to be aware of some of the details in the larger connection, how those decisions are being looked at, that we have a time to do that together. But there's certainly nothing that's come to my mind or I think to other church leaders that would suggest that we're going to be doing anything different here on Court Street any of the days that we have our doors open.
Thank you.
Yeah. So other thoughts, questions? Okay.
My name is Carol Lutz. I heard at a kind of a introductory or overview comments that were given to us about this split that not only was it the sexuality issue, but also there were some concerns about the churches that wanted to go away from the current United Methodist Church, that they were longing for, I guess I would say, less such a hierarchical organization, that they wanted more local control over their churches. So given that kind of information, can we, I guess I'd like some information about those that stay in the United Methodist Church. Will the organizational structure remain the same? Or, Pastor Jeremy, you mentioned that because of the lack of general conference, there is some local, a bit of just tweaking now that's happening. Do you see the local churches maybe having more local, I guess, direction, or do you think we'll stay with the current structure?
Ooh, there were, I think I counted at least 3 questions in there, and they were all good ones. So I'm going to try to address as much of that as I can, and if I miss anything really important, throw up your hand and ask a follow-up. So one of the questions is, will the Global Methodist Church be less hierarchical? It's one of the ironic things that we're seeing right now is that one of the things that people who are leaving said they wanted was a more streamlined church structure with less hierarchy, and now that we have a sort of a bit of a look at what that denomination is actually going to look like, in many ways it's more centralized and more hierarchical. The bishops in the Global Methodist Church will have more power to kick congregations out of the denomination, to punish clergy, to determine who becomes clergy in the first place. There's more centralized power with the bishop in the new denomination than there is in the current United Methodist Church, which is ironic given a lot of what people said they wanted in a Global Methodist Church. So the other question is, so how is the church that's left, the United Methodist Church, how is it likely to change? One of the things you heard in the video is that there's going to need to be a streamlining. As churches leave, and this is something we've been experiencing honestly for decades now. The United Methodist Church and other churches in North America have been declining for about 50, 60 years now, very steadily, about 1 to 1.5% loss of membership year to year, over and over and over again. And so this will be a continuation of a process that has already been happening. And a few years ago, we eliminated a couple of the districts in Michigan and redrew the district boundaries so that district superintendents were responsible for even more churches than they already had. That's happening again in Michigan. We are once again going to lose some districts and redraw some district boundaries. And inevitably, with those changes, we're going to have some changes to the way in which we relate to each other and organize ourselves. One of the changes that has happened has been the formation of something in our area we call mission zones. So because district superintendents have so many churches now that they can't possibly be close to or relate closely to all of them, we have been restructured in a way that encourages us to relate to one another. So here in Flint, I chair a mission zone that includes several of the Flint area churches, and in fact that's being redrawn, so I can't give you the list off the top of my head anymore of who's in it because it's about to change. But we meet on a regular basis, are in ministry together. We do things like pulpit swaps, and you've seen some of the things that we do, shared worship services. We are going to be probably more relational on a lateral level with one another, rather than being more relational with the district superintendent in a top-down direction. And I think that process is going to continue going forward. So you'll see changes like that. And from time to time, they'll say, well, because of things that have happened, we're trying this, or we're streamlining that. That process has already been going on for quite a while. It's going to continue. Did I get to where? Okay, good. Thank you. Other questions?
Hi, Marianna Langley. As most of you know, I'm from a very inclusive family, and I'm very open and inclusive myself, I hope. Maybe it's too soon to ask, but is Court Street going to then, do we vote, or what do we do about having you as a clergy performing same-sex marriage, and does it occur here in our sanctuary? How will that be addressed?
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good, and what will be one of the more important questions for us going forward. So one of the things that I'm going to reiterate is that, I know what I want to do. I know who I am. I know what I believe. But I can't make that decision on behalf of Court Street United Methodist Church. There's some decisions that the congregation is going to need to make and claim that will be who you are, regardless of who the clergy people are who are appointed to the church. This is one of those questions where we are going to go through a time of discernment. So I'm gonna give away a little bit of where we're gonna head. One of the things that as Dane and I have been talking about, what can our process be and what will the conversation look like at Court Street? One of the things that I want to know is, where are you and where are other people in our church family on some of these questions? Like, would you be comfortable with the clergy person appointed to serve the church performing same-sex weddings in the sanctuary or outside of the sanctuary at another location? Would you be comfortable receiving, if the bishop were to appoint an openly LGBTQ plus clergy person, would you be comfortable with that? Would you as a congregation be open to that? These are questions that are going to need to be made by the congregation and not by me as a clergy person. And so, we're going to, again, like I said, today is a beginning. We're going to continue for the next several months the conversation, in part by asking you all to let us know how you feel. We'll likely have some sort of a survey of the congregation saying, would you be comfortable with? How would you feel about? And we'll gather that and actually see where we are as a church family. I think I have a sense of where we are, but it's not my place to speak for the congregation. I'd really like to know, actually know, because it may very well be that it's just I'm talking to some people and completely missing what a whole other group of people in the church are thinking or feeling. So I want to know the broad scope of what we have in our church family. And then once we know sort of where we are as a church family, we can begin to say, okay, it looks like we're here. Knowing that, how do we carry that out in our ministry? What do we do? It seems really strange to be having these conversations at a time when the Book of Discipline hasn't changed, right? The Book of Discipline still says, the clergy, I can't do the same-sex, I can't perform a same-sex wedding in the sanctuary or outside of it. It says that churches can't host them in the sanctuary. But the thing that we're running into right now is that we're in this weird in-between time, and it turns out, again, there's no mechanism for punishing a congregation that decides to have the weddings in the sanctuary or to do other things. There's no mechanism where a bishop can come in and kick you out of the United Methodist Church, or there's not even a slap on the wrist anybody can give you. The rule is there, but there's not any kind of an enforcement mechanism. And so, the question is, what do we do living in this sort of in-between time, knowing that we're living in a time when, our bishop at the very least has said that he's not interested in pressing forward with charges against clergy people who perform these weddings, that they're not being dismissed, but they're just kind of sitting on his desk. And so, we're living in a strange in-between time when there is possibly some opportunity for us to make some of these decisions for ourselves. But when I say for ourselves, I mean Court Street United Methodist Church will make that decision as a congregation. So again, I know what I believe, I know what I hope, but it's not my place to come in and make those decisions for Court Street. Did that speak to what you were asking? Okay, thank you.
So we're thinking that we have a local governance structure in place. Again, this is something that many of you know very well in this room and others may be curious about. We have a church council that brings together our leaders of finance and staff parish and trustees and lay leader like myself and our delegates to the Michigan Conference to have conversations, to make decisions, with and on behalf of the congregation. So we'll be having those discussions, and we'll be looking to come to the entire congregation to gain a sense, as Pastor Jeremy said, of what are the viewpoints? Where do we have some agreement? Where do we have some disagreement? Personally, I find a great deal of comfort in a bishop who we saw in the video, say that he's interested in freedom of thought, that we can think differently but love alike. To me, that resonates with where I find myself on my faith journey. So that means that we have the opportunity to have that conversation as a congregation, to think about what we want our staff parish relations committee to be sharing with the district superintendent about appointments. What kind of congregation are we? What kind of ministry are we seeking to do? That will allow the district superintendents and the bishop to think about what sort of pastor should be here. For now, it's Pastor Jeremy, and we're like a family. We don't see that changing, but we know that at some point it will in the United Methodist system, that it is an appointed process. So we want to be able to have those conversations as a congregation through our structure, but not behind closed doors, really, with everyone contributing and participating to those discussions. So yes.
From my perspective, I feel like our church is pretty inclusive, but I just want to know, from somebody else's perspective, that could be, they could disagree with that. Have we lost people so far that feel like they would rather be more in a traditional setting than in the setting that I assume that we kind of are?
So one of the great gifts that people sometimes will give me as a clergy person is they'll tell me on their way out the door why they're leaving. People don't always do that, but I'm always grateful when they do. I can say that there have been, in the 7 years I've been here, there have been, I think, one instance in which somebody said, I am leaving because of, the rainbow banners or whatever it was. I don't want to be part of that kind of a church. There have been other people where that may have been a factor, but not more than a handful. And I'll also say that we also have a number of people who have come into the church for exactly the same reasons. In the 7 years that I've been here, I would say that the general inclusiveness that was here, by the way, when I got here, 7 years ago. That wasn't anything that I was really tickled to see how you embraced everybody who walked through the door when I got here 7 years ago. So that spirit of inclusivity and hospitality has drawn in more people than it's pushed away. But yeah, there have been some people, not a lot, less than a handful, but there have been some people who have left because of that. One of the things that go ahead, while you're walking, I'll talk a little bit. One of the things that I think Court Street does really well is give people what the bishop calls a sense of spaciousness. That it's okay to not be in agreement with everybody who's sitting around you in the pews, and we can still have grace for one another and still love one another and still be a church family together. I think that the fact that we have that kind of a spirit at Court Street Church has kept some other people who may still feel uncomfortable with hanging rainbow signs outside the church, or may feel uncomfortable with sometimes the pastor says something that kind of sticks in my craw as I'm walking out the door on Sunday, has kept people from leaving. Because they feel like still we have a sort of freedom of spirit and a freedom of thought here at Court Street. So I think this has been harder for other congregations that don't have that already in place. All right, next question.
I'm Cliff Lutz, and I sort of had a procedural question. I think it is. The video indicated 2/3 of a vote to change or to leave the United Methodist. That may be happening now. official that 2/3 is. The cut is, the next day. But my question is, it's in 2004 or 2024 is when all the rules will sort of be out there. And so it seems to me like churches are going to be voting throughout this at least 2-year period. It may be after 2024, once they see what the real rules are. So to me, this is going to be another 3 or 4 years before the districts really get things separated.
Yeah, this is not going to be like we do this for a few months and then it's over kind of a situation. Again, breaking up is hard to do, and this is going to be a bit of a drawn out process. And by the way, one of the questions that we'll have to ask ourselves as a congregation is, do we want to disaffiliate? I think I know the answer to that, but again, I don't. So that'll be on the the list of questions that we ask people. If we got a bunch of those back, I would be surprised. But I've been surprised before. So churches though that do want to leave the United Methodist Church right now are facing a difficult question. Do we do that now, or do we wait until after 2024? And there's a real variety of wisdom on that question. In the video, you saw that our Michigan conference leadership are saying probably best to just take it slow and wait and see what happens in 2024. The counter argument to that is that right now churches are able to disaffiliate under some special terms that were passed at the 2019 General Conference that don't require you to buy your church building from the conference outright. It's not easy, it's not cheap, but it's less difficult and less expensive than it would have been without that special process. That process expires at the end of 2023. So churches that are thinking they want to use that process to disaffiliate, they kind of got to get on their horse and ride. They need to do that now because it needs to be voted on at next year's annual conference in order to make it official. And so the clock is ticking. And the chances are that at 2024, it's really hard to predict what's going to happen at a general conference. They might not get what they think they're going to get, and then they will have paid umpteen number of years of ministry shares while they were waiting for something to change, that it turns out. So that might actually be, it might be more expensive for churches and more difficult for them to wait. There's just it's kind of a coin toss at this point. So we do have a few churches that have already disaffiliated in Michigan, fewer than a dozen at this point. There were 4, I think, that disaffiliated at this last annual conference. There were maybe a half a dozen that had disaffiliated before that. Next year we may see a higher number, or we might find that churches really are waiting until 2024, and there might not be any next year. So I couldn't tell you. It's really hard to predict, and it's a real pickle for churches that want out to figure out, do we do it now or do we wait?
And I think that I was going to mention that the district superintendent has said those same things, that if you look across our East Winds district, so Flint and Genesee County, but then out into the thumb, a bit of northern Oakland County, there have been churches that have disaffiliated. There have been churches that have closed, some that may have been on that path even before these questions were raised. Congregations have merged. We have even in our Flint area now a new cooperative parish between Flint Calvary and Flint Hope, Flint Township. So those two will both see Pastor Timmons as their pastor, but they're both retaining their own governance and decision-making and budgets at this point. So all of those things, while they haven't been occurring at Court Street, again, for those of you who want to be up to date on what's happening with your other Methodist friends or churches that we may have even been in relationship with in the past, those things are changing around us for this particular reason, but also for general kinds of challenges in our denomination.
One of the, I mean, we're not seeing a rush for the door in Michigan, and that's due to a couple of reasons. I mean, down in the southeast, down in the Bible Belt, they're seeing, some conferences are seeing dozens and dozens of churches disaffiliating this year. There have only been just a handful here in Michigan. One of the reasons for that is that Michigan, in the years that I've been part of the Michigan conference and the Detroit conference before that, has really moved in a more inclusive direction. There were, I think we spent a long time kind of at 60-40 in a more traditional view of inclusion and sexuality. And then suddenly it flipped, and it seems like the last few years we've barreled through, so we were 60-40 in the other direction, and then 70-30, and we might even be pushing to 80-20 when we have these annual conference votes. And so Michigan has become, over the last decade or so, an annual conference that's very inclusive-minded and open to doing this in a new way that's different from what we've done for the last 50 years. And so there's not going to be a huge number of churches in Michigan that are looking to take advantage of this Global Methodist Church. The other reason is that it is an expensive proposition. You don't have to buy your church property outright, but it is still a lot of money for most congregations. Down in the Bible Belt, there's more money in religion than there is in Michigan, to put it in the most crass sort of American capitalistic terms. Churches down there have fuller coffers, and so they can afford to pay the cost of exiting the church. Churches in Michigan, I think there are a number of churches in Michigan that would like to leave, but are looking at the price tag and saying we just can't afford that, or it would be a huge sacrifice. Maybe we'll wait a couple years. So there's the dynamics are that in Michigan there's not a lot of people leaving for the door, but there may be more people who want to leave than are actually exiting. Any other questions?
We'll come back for a second.
Right, yep.
Reba Walling, and not so much a question as a follow-up comment to what you've just said. I think that presence here today and then wanting to hear the video shows that some people want to stay informed as to what the progress is. So based on what you've just said, with the cooperative of the the Calvary United Methodist and Hope United Methodist, would there be a way for you, for example, in the newsletter, just to have a little section of conference or fair winds updates so that we aren't just talking and, oh, I heard, well, is this happening? That you can specifically keep us informed about the changes that are in reality happening in our area. And that just takes away from a lot of questioning and speculation.
Yeah, I'll take that under advisement as a prudent suggestion. I think I hope I hope you feel like you can ask me questions, you can ask Dane questions. My sense has always been that more information helps to lower people's anxiety level. Even if you don't like the information that you're giving, I'd rather know than not know. And so I want to use every good channel of communication we can to keep people informed, and that might be a real good feature to add to our newsletter or to share in some other form. Thank you for that suggestion. I appreciate it. I think we got time for maybe one last question, and then we'll, because we did want to get people out at 11:30. Carol, I think it's back to you because you had your hand up.
Carol Lutz, Pastor, based on what you said about Court Street United Methodist Church now having the opportunity to shape and frame our own preferences within this wide spectrum of acceptance, would it be possible then for a church that could not, say, afford to leave the United Methodist Church, so they stay in it, but in their hearts they are more traditional in their thinking, would it be possible for them to stay in the United Methodist Church, but actually at their local level decide among themselves that they would prefer not to have their pastor perform same-sex marriages?
That's a good question. And the answer is, yeah, in order to do that, all they'd have to do is nothing, right? I mean, that is the status quo. That is where we are right now. And thank you I'm so glad that was a really good question to end on too, because it gives me an opportunity to say something I think is so important in this conversation, which is that nobody has to leave. Right, churches that have more traditional or restrictive views of human sexuality are welcome to stay within the United Methodist Church. And in fact, nobody can make a clergy person perform any wedding, let alone a same-sex wedding. And so, clergy don't have to leave. Congregations don't have to leave. Congregations may wrestle if the denomination moves in a new direction. May find themselves wrestling with: am I comfortable being part of a denomination with people who see things, very differently or do things very differently than I do, but nobody is being forced to leave. And also, whatever decisions congregations make, nobody has to leave a congregation either. I mean, obviously, people are always free to walk out the door and become Presbyterian or Global Methodist or whatever. But here at Court Street, we're going to go through a process of discernment. We're going to make some decisions about how we're in ministry. But at the end of that process, even if you don't like the decisions that are made, even if you disagree with some of the decisions, or the congregation wants to go in a direction that doesn't match where you are, you can still stay. You don't have to go anywhere. I'm preaching a little bit, but if you walk out the door thinking that you're going to find a church someplace where you agree with everybody about everything, I wish you the best of luck. You're going to be hard pressed to do that. And so, if you feel like, boy, I don't know about the direction that the congregation went on that decision, but I sure do love a whole lot of other things about Court Street Church, you can absolutely stay. There's no reason that anybody needs to leave. So yeah, we may end up for a time, or maybe even for the foreseeable future, in a United Methodist Church where some congregations have a very inclusive ministry, and other congregations have a more, what we would call traditionalist approach to ministry. And there might be a huge amount of there is right now already a huge amount of diversity within the United Methodist Church. That just might become sort of codified in a way that it hasn't been in the past. But again, that's now we're getting into predicting how things are going to go, and that's probably the farthest we can go without walking out on a really skinny limb.
And we'll finish with Pastor praying us out here in a minute. But I think if you were following the video to the end, after a lot of the legal and technical kinds of questions that were answered, I think it was Reverend Paul Perez who went through a set of those more spiritual kinds of questions. So we can all ask a lot about the human institution of the church, and who's on which committee, and who's taking which votes, and how much does this cost, or how much does that cost. But it seems that at the end of the day, we also want to make sure we're asking questions about what we believe it means to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. What do we each see as most important in our spiritual life? And as the bishop said, can we see ourselves in a church where people think differently but love alike? And that seems to be where the United Methodist Church is trying to go, the place that it wants to put the stake in the ground. And I think as we have all the rest of these other conversations about committees and conferences and finances, that we'll want to continue, each of us in our own way and collectively, to come back to those questions and see what wisdom we can gain from reflecting on those and praying upon those. So thank you all so much for taking the time on this really beautiful Michigan morning, where you probably have many other things you could have gotten done during this time. But I think this has been a helpful conversation. Please know you can also continue to contact me. Of course, our pastor is open for coffee and questions. I do also sit on the district superintendency committee, so I have an ability to more easily communicate with him as well. Him and Laura are active members of our congregation. We haven't seen them in person in worship, but they do continue to be here with us through our virtual ministries and in spirit as well. So we're blessed to have that connection with our district superintendent. So, Pastor.
Yeah, and before I do close this in prayer, just again, a special word of thanks to Ryan Pratt and to Nate Urban for coming in and working on a Saturday. We really do appreciate the both of them. This would have been a very different experience without them. And also to Dane Walling for his leadership of the congregation today and in months to come. Really, really appreciate that. All right, take a deep breath. And let's reach out to God in prayer. God, we have this mixture of hopefulness and concern, and curiosity and confusion. The more we learn, sometimes it seems the less we know, the less confident we are about our ability to see what's coming down the road. And in this place, after this conversation, we are more than ever aware of what it means to have faith and to be sure of the things that we hope for and believe in things that we cannot see, to place the church, to place our neighbors, to place this world in your hands, and to believe that whatever is coming down the road, whatever tomorrow holds, you will be in tomorrow with us. You will be walking that road beside us. And so we do not need to be afraid. God, we give you thanks for the spirit of graciousness and hospitality, of love and inclusion that we found when we first walked through the doors of this church. You call us to offer to everyone we meet in this place, everyone we meet in our lives. We pray that your Holy Spirit and that spirit of grace would carry us through these next few months and years. And that Court Street United Methodist Church, when we have conflict, would find that it is fruitful conflict and not bruising conflict. It's a conflict that leads us deeper in faith and closer to you. That we might find that conflict does not need to lead to quarrelsomeness or divisiveness. That we would learn to love one another better as we learn to see and hear each other better. God, help us to continue to show the way, to model faithfulness, graciousness, and to be a beacon for other churches all around us who are also going through this time, wrestling with these questions. God, months from now, years from now, we pray that people would look back and say, Court Street did it as well as it could be done. These things we pray in Jesus. Amen. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. I'm happy to stick around a little bit if there's any follow-up questions you want to ask at the sidebar, but you are free with a blessing to go and enjoy the sunshine.